She was the perfect wife, dedicated and loving, but she ended up being humiliated, despised, and cast aside as if she were worth nothing. Who would have imagined that years later, that same woman would return as a powerful businesswoman, leaving everyone jaw-dropped? Her husband, her old rival, and even her own mother-in-law couldn't believe their eyes. Do you want to know how she achieved her impressive transformation? Stay with us. Comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. I promise you, this story will leave you speechless. The echo of Mrs. Eleanor Sterling's high heels resonated down the marble hallway, accompanied by the soft jingle of the gold bracelets adorning her wrists. In the main dining room, Emily sat in complete silence, her hands carefully crossed in her lap. In front of her was a table impeccably set for breakfast: precision-cut fruit, freshly baked bagels and pastries, and orange juice in crystal glasses. Alexander was skimming the Wall Street Journal, ignoring her completely. Mrs. Sterling's voice broke in with her customary air of authority. "Have you finished reading the news, Alexander? Because Emily should listen to something more useful." Emily looked up, somewhat bewildered, but Alexander barely reacted, turning the page of the newspaper. "What would be more useful, Mother?" Mrs. Sterling approached, placing a hand on the back of Emily's chair and leaning slightly toward her. For example, learning how to behave like a true Sterling. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. She had heard that phrase so many times that she was beginning to believe it was the only thing Mrs. Sterling saw in her: an intruder. Since she married Alexander, not a single day had passed without her mother-in-law reminding her that she wasn't good enough to be in that house. Alexander, with his typical indifference, placed the newspaper on the table and took a sip of his black coffee. "Mother, Emily is learning. She just needs a little more time." Mrs. Sterling's smile was cutting, more a gesture of triumph than reassurance. "Time doesn't correct a lack of class, Alexander." Emily swallowed hard and lowered her gaze to her plate. She tried to speak, but the words seemed trapped in her throat. Alexander finished his coffee, stood up, and placed his napkin on the table with a casual movement. "I have an early meeting. I'll see you later." Emily watched him leave, wishing he had at least given her a smile or a word of encouragement. But no, her husband was always busy, always distant. That morning, Emily decided to try something different. She headed to the back garden, a place that made her feel a little more at peace. The colors of the flowers and the sound of the water flowing from the fountain seemed like a refuge from the constant cold she felt inside the mansion. She cut some fresh hydrangeas and roses and returned to the main living room, where she began to arrange them in a crystal vase. As she did so, she thought about how she could reconnect with Alexander. Maybe a special dinner, something to remind them of the days when everything seemed simpler. The noise of Mrs. Sterling's heels interrupted her thoughts again. "What are you doing?" Emily turned slowly, holding the vase with both hands. I wanted to add a little color to the living room. I thought it might." Mrs. Sterling raised a hand to stop her. "This isn't a county fair, Emily. This house has a style that must be maintained. These flowers are too vulgar." Emily felt the heat rise to her face, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I just wanted to contribute something nice." Mrs. Sterling approached, taking the vase from her hands with feigned delicacy. She observed it for a few seconds before setting it down on a side table with a gesture of disdain. "If you really want to be useful, Emily, start by understanding your place." Emily pressed her lips together, stopping the tears from surfacing. Instead of responding, she picked up the flowers and left the living room, seeking refuge in the garden once again. But even there, the echo of Mrs. Sterling's words pursued her. In the afternoon, Alexander returned early, which was unusual. Emily seized the opportunity to talk to him. She found him in his home office, reviewing some documents. "Can we talk for a moment?" He didn't look up from the papers. "What is it about?" Emily took a step forward, trying to sound calm, though her voice trembled slightly. "I feel like we've been very distant lately. I wish we could spend more time together." Alexander let out a sigh, dropping the documents onto the mahogany desk. "Emily, my work is demanding. Don't expect me to be here all the time. I'm not asking for that. Just a little of your attention." He finally looked at her, but his expression showed no empathy, only irritation. "You knew what my life was like before we got married. Nothing has changed." Emily felt something inside her break a little more. She took a step back, trying to process what she had just heard. Alexander went back to grabbing his papers, ignoring her completely. That night, as she lay alone in bed, Emily looked at herself in the vanity mirror. Her reflection seemed weaker, dimmer than before. Tears began to fall silently, but this time they weren't just from sadness. There was something else, a seed of indignation beginning to grow inside her. In that mansion full of luxury and opulence, Emily felt lonelier than ever. As the lights of the house went out one by one, she remained awake, wondering how many more times she would endure this life. The crash of a plate shattering into 1,000 pieces cut through the air of the dining room. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, feeling like the whole world stopped in an endless second. Mrs. Sterling, with one hand on her chest and the other pointing at the table, looked at her as if she had just committed the worst of crimes. Unbelievable. You can't even serve a plate without making a mess. Emily, this is a house, not a roadside diner. Trembling, Emily bent down to pick up the pieces of the plate that had fallen. It had barely been an accident, a slight distraction while trying to serve lunch to the family. But in Mrs. Sterling's eyes, everything she did was proof of her inability to be part of that family. "I'm sorry, it was careless. It won't happen again." "I hope so," the matriarch replied with an icy tone. "Though honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened again. You should have gotten used to the expectations of this house by now, Emily, but it seems you haven't learned a thing." From the other end of the table, Alexander let out a sigh, looking up from his smartphone. "Mother, don't exaggerate. It's just a plate. Emily, if you need help, ask the staff to handle it." The comment, though disguised as support, hit Emily like another slap in the face. It was as if her own husband expected nothing of her, as if he had already accepted her as someone incompetent. "Thanks, Alexander, but I can do it alone," Emily said with a voice that tried not to crack. Alexander went back to focusing on his phone, while Mrs. Sterling leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. For Emily, every word, every gesture was like an invisible blow, a constant reminder that no matter how hard she tried, it would never be enough. That night, Emily made an effort to create a special atmosphere for dinner. She had spent hours in the kitchen preparing Alexander's favorite dish, something she hoped might bring them closer, even if just for a moment. When everything was ready, she lit some candles and sat down to wait. Minutes passed, then an hour. When Alexander finally arrived, he had his suit jacket over his shoulder, and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with alcohol preceded him. Emily stood up quickly, trying to hide her disappointment. "I prepared something special for us tonight. I thought we could have dinner together." He looked at the table, and then at her with a slight, tired smile. "Thanks, but I already ate. It was a longer meeting than I expected. Can we talk? At least? We haven't spent any time together lately." Alexander draped his jacket over the back of a chair and poured himself a glass of water. "Emily, I've had a very heavy day. If you don't mind, I'd prefer to rest." She watched him as he walked up the stairs, leaving her alone in the dining room. The food slowly went cold in front of her, and the candles began to burn down until only small, trembling flames remained. The next morning, Mrs. Sterling wasted no time in resuming her campaign of criticism. During breakfast, in front of some family guests, she decided to launch another comment. "Emily, dear, I've noticed you always try to do everything yourself. But you must understand that in this house, a woman doesn't need to dirty her hands. That is for other types of people." Emily felt the gazes of the others on her, as if everyone was waiting for her reaction. She wanted to respond, but Alexander intervened first. "Mother, Emily has good intentions. She just needs time to get used to it." Alexander's tone was condescending, as if speaking about someone who needed to be educated. Emily clenched her hands under the table, feeling frustration begin to grow inside her. That afternoon, when all the guests had left, Emily approached Alexander in the home office. "We need to talk." He looked up from his computer, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Now what? What's wrong is that I can't keep living like this. Every day I feel more invisible. You do nothing to defend me in front of your mother. You don't even try to listen to me." "Emily, we already talked about this. I can't be behind you all the time explaining to my mother or the others why you are here. That is something you have to handle." "But I can't do it alone, Alexander. We are supposed to be a team. Why do you make me feel like I'm here only to decorate your life?" He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples with evident irritation. "Emily, if this life isn't for you, maybe you should think about whether this is what you really want." She looked at him in disbelief. feeling those words break something inside her. Alexander went back to concentrating on his work, making it clear that for him, the conversation was over. That night, Emily sat in front of the mirror in her bedroom, observing her reflection. She no longer saw the hopeful woman who had believed in Alexander's promises. She saw someone who was on the verge of breaking, but also someone who was beginning to realize she didn't deserve this treatment. The sound of rain hitting the windows filled the silence of the mansion. Emily was at the vanity, her fingers brushing an emerald pendant that shone under the dim light of the room. It was a recent gift from Alexander, given with a fleeting smile and empty words. "Something for you to remember what you mean to me," he had said before leaving for one of his many late-night meetings. She took it in her hands, feeling the cold of the metal against her skin. It wasn't just a pendant. It was a cruel reminder of the life she had built beside a man who had never been what he promised. She dropped it back onto the vanity as if it burned. That day, something in her decided she was no longer going to ignore the truths hiding behind the absent smiles and poorly rehearsed excuses. The hallway was empty when she left the room. Alexander wasn't there, and Mrs. Sterling had gone out early, leaving the house in a strange silence Emily didn't recognize. She walked toward Alexander's office, a place she had always avoided because she knew that was where the secrets he refused to share resided. She opened the door cautiously. The scent of leather and wood filled the space, mixed with a perfume that wasn't hers. On the desk, Alexander's cell phone was abandoned next to a stack of documents. Her gaze fixed on it, and a dangerous idea crossed her mind. She didn't want to be that woman, but the weight of doubt was unbearable. She took the phone and, with trembling hands, unlocked it. A WhatsApp notification appeared on the screen. "Good morning, baby. Don't forget our date tonight. I miss you." The sender, Jessica H. The name was a sharp blow. Emily felt the air become thick, as if the room were closing in on her. She opened the conversation. The words she found were like blades cutting every fiber of her being. "Last night I dreamt of you. I can't wait to see you again. She will never know anything, and if she knows, it doesn't matter. I always knew you are the only one who makes me feel complete." Each message was another brick in the wall Alexander had built to isolate her from the truth. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't of sadness, they were of indignation. Alexander hadn't just betrayed her, he had done so with an ease and contempt that were unbearable. The office door burst open, and Alexander appeared with his jacket in hand. His eyes fixed on Emily and the cell phone she was holding, and his expression changed instantly. "What are you doing with my phone?" "Seeing what you hide." Emily raised her gaze, her eyes full of pain he didn't seem to comprehend. "Seeing the truth you never had the courage to tell me. That doesn't give you the right to invade my privacy." Alexander tried to snatch the phone, but Emily held it firmly, as if it were a loaded weapon. "Privacy? That's what you're worried about? You had no problem destroying our life, but this is too much truth?" Alexander sighed, tossing his jacket onto a chair and crossing his arms. His tone was condescending, almost bored. "Emily, don't make a scene. Jessica and I are friends, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Emily let out a bitter laugh as she placed the phone on the desk. "Do you really expect me to believe that after reading all this? After seeing how you talk about me with her? How you say I'm just a pretty face?" "Say it to my face, Alexander, because it's the truth." Alexander's voice rose, and his face filled with impatience. "You never understood what this world demands. I tried to make you fit in, but it was useless. Jessica is different. She understands who I am and what I need." Emily took a step forward, confronting him with her gaze. "Then why did you marry me?" "Because at that moment, it was what I needed." Alexander looked at her with a coldness that cut like glass. "Don't make this bigger than it is, Emily. Jessica was always there, and you were never on my level." Those last words were like a sentence. Emily felt something inside her break, but she didn't allow herself to fall. She straightened her back and lifted her head with a dignity she didn't even know she had. "You know what, Alexander? For the first time, I agree with you. I was never on your level. I was always better than this. Better than you." She left the cell phone on the desk and walked out of the office without looking back. Alexander followed her, trying to stop her. "Emily, don't exaggerate. Talk to me like an adult." Emily stopped at the foot of the stairs, turning toward him with a calm that disconcerted him. "There is nothing left to say. Keep your level, Alexander. I'll keep my dignity." She walked up the stairs and entered her room. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting out a long, deep sigh. Her eyes fixed on the emerald pendant on the vanity, shining under the dim light. She picked it up between her fingers, feeling the cold of the metal once more. It was beautiful, but empty like everything Alexander had built around her. She dropped it back onto the vanity and looked at herself in the mirror. There were no tears in her eyes, only a resolution she had never felt before. She was no longer the woman seeking to be enough. Now she was someone who knew what she deserved, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her again. The mansion glowed with an air of carefully calculated opulence. Chandeliers cast golden sparkles over the impeccably decorated table, where every detail, from floral arrangements to carved crystal goblets, spoke of luxury and power. However, the atmosphere charged with elegant murmurs hid a subterranean tension perceptible only to Emily. In front of her bedroom mirror, she adjusted the simple black dress she had chosen. It wasn't just a fashion choice, it represented something deeper mourning for the love she once believed true, and a symbol of the irrevocable decision she was about to take. She allowed herself a moment to observe her reflection. Her eyes, loaded with a mixture of determination and sadness, looked back at her. "Today it ends," she murmured to herself. When she went down to the living room, Alexander was already there, surrounded by guests. His charming smile and fluid conversation contrasted with the weight in Emily's chest. A few steps from him, Jessica wore a flashy red dress, deliberately standing out among the others. Emily couldn't help but notice how Alexander's eyes drifted toward her frequently, a gesture she now recognized as a veiled mockery. Mrs. Sterling, always attentive to details, approached Emily with her usual haughty bearing. "I hope for once you don't cause a problem. Tonight Alexander has important partners here. We don't want a spectacle." Emily held her gaze, feeling Mrs. Sterling's words trying to pierce her armor. "I will do what is necessary to make this night unforgettable." The slight arch of Mrs. Sterling's eyebrows showed her mistrust, but she didn't respond. When the guests took their seats, Alexander stood up, holding a glass of wine with the ease of an experienced host. "Dear friends, tonight is a reminder of everything we have achieved as a family and as partners. Let's toast to success, loyalty, and the alliances that unite us." The guests raised their glasses in a synchronized gesture. But Emily remained motionless, her hands resting in her lap as indignation grew within her. She stood up slowly, interrupting the moment with a firm voice. "If you'll allow me, I have something to add." Gazes turned toward her, some curious, others confused. Alexander furrowed his brow, trying to maintain composure. "Emily, honey, I don't think this is the moment. I think it is the perfect moment." The murmur of the guests ceased. Emily advanced toward the center of the room, each step resonating on the marble like a calculated strike. Alexander tried to stop her with a hand on her arm, but she broke free with a decisive movement. "Tonight, I want to talk about the truth. The truth behind this family, behind this marriage, and behind the empty words we are hearing right now." Jessica's eyes widened slightly, her rigid posture betraying her discomfort. Alexander, for his part, hardened his jaw, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "For years, I have tried to be the perfect wife, the one who adjusts to expectations. But you know what? I discovered that in this family, perfection is not enough. Alexander, my husband, has not only ignored me, but has betrayed me in the cruelest way. And he didn't do it alone." Emily's words were like knives aimed with precision. Her eyes met Jessica's, who finally spoke, trying to deflect attention. "Emily, I think you're confused. This isn't the way to resolve misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Is it a misunderstanding that you and my husband have built a relationship based on lies? Is it a misunderstanding that while I fought to fit into this world, you two mocked me behind my back?" Alexander took a step forward, his voice full of contained rage. "That's enough, Emily. You're losing your mind." "Losing my mind?" "Alexander, the only thing I've lost is time with you." The murmurs among the guests intensified. Some exchanged looks of surprise, while others seemed to enjoy the scandal. An older woman, one of Alexander's most influential partners, whispered to her husband, "I always suspected there was something strange in his relationship with that young woman." Mrs. Sterling, seeing the situation spiral out of control, stood up from her seat with an icy expression. Emily, you have proven that you do not belong in this family. Your behavior is shameful. I think you should leave before doing more damage." Emily turned to her with a look charged with defiance. "Shameful, Mrs. Sterling? What is shameful is how you have always justified your son's actions, how you have allowed them to humiliate me. But no more. Tonight is not about me leaving this family, it is about you showing who you really are." Jessica tried to intervene again, standing up from her chair with a sugary tone. "I think we are all tired, Emily. Maybe we can talk in private, resolve this like adults." "Resolve this?" Emily pulled an envelope from her purse containing copies of the messages and photographs confirming the infidelity. "Here is the truth, Jessica. There is nothing to resolve. Alexander and you already did it all." Alexander, pale-faced, reached a hand toward Emily, as if he could regain control. "Please, stop. This won't get you anywhere." "Nowhere, Alexander? At least now I know where I stand, and it isn't next to you." With those words, she dropped the envelope onto the table, spun on her heels, and began to walk toward the door. The guests remained motionless, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Some tried to console Mrs. Sterling, who was too stunned to respond. Alexander, for the first time, seemed completely defeated, while Jessica avoided the gazes of those who were clearly judging her. When Emily crossed the main doors, the fresh night air hit her with force, but also with a sense of relief. Every step away from that mansion was a step toward her freedom. That night, she had not only exposed Alexander and Jessica, but she had also recovered something invaluable: her dignity. She looked up at the starry sky and, for the first time in a long time, smiled. The end of that chapter was the beginning of something much bigger. The train moved slowly, cutting through the landscape of the outskirts of the city. Emily was seated by the window with a small suitcase at her feet. Her hands rested on her lap, still, but in her mind, chaos was still unleashed. The last words of Alexander and Mrs. Sterling still burned like a hot iron. "You never should have crossed that door." However, as the city lights disappeared into the distance, a new feeling began to take shape inside her. It wasn't fear or sadness, but a cold and calculated determination that kept her upright despite the exhaustion. When she arrived in Savannah, the train station was quiet. Emily stepped off with firm strides, although she felt that every movement took her further away from everything she had known. With an address written on a crumpled piece of paper, she began to walk through the cobblestone streets, looking for the place where she would stay. The room she had rented was small and simple, with a narrow bed, a table, and a window overlooking an alley. Emily left her suitcase on the bed and stood observing the space. It wasn't much, but she didn't need more. The silence was broken by the sound of her empty stomach. She hadn't eaten since leaving the mansion. She went down to the street in search of something simple, something that wouldn't force her to think too much. As she walked, a sweet aroma attracted her toward a small coffee shop. The place was modest, with wooden tables and colorful decor. Emily sat in a corner, far from the windows, watching how the employees served with speed. A young woman with a worn apron approached to take her order. "What can I get you?" "A coffee and a muffin, please." While she waited, she observed the other customers, couples talking in low voices, workers going over documents, and a group of tourists laughing among themselves. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt invisible, and that was a relief. When they brought her order, she took the first sip of coffee, enjoying the warmth running through her body. At that moment, a male voice caught her attention. It was firm but calm, with a tone that conveyed authority without arrogance. "Excuse me, but I think you dropped this." Emily looked up and saw a man holding a handkerchief. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed impossible to ignore him. He had a magnetic presence, with dark eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to show. "Thank you. I didn't even notice." "No problem. I tend to notice details. It's part of my job." The man smiled before retreating to another table, where he placed a laptop and began typing in silence. Emily watched him out of the corner of her eye while she finished her coffee, feeling an unexpected curiosity about this stranger who seemed so serene in a world full of chaos. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Emily needed work, and although she had never had to look for one, she understood it was necessary to move forward. One afternoon, while passing in front of the same coffee shop, she noticed a sign on the door: "Staff wanted." She entered without thinking much, and the owner, An older man with kind eyes received her with a smile. "Do you have experience?" "Not much, but I learn fast." The owner observed her for a moment, as if trying to measure her sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "You start tomorrow. It's a simple job, but we need you to be punctual and treat the customers well." Emily thanked him with a lump in her throat. That night, returning to her room, she felt for the first time in a long time something resembling hope. At the coffee shop, the days were long and the tasks repetitive, but Emily began to find a certain comfort in the routine. She was surprised to notice that the man with the handkerchief, whose name she discovered was Liam, was a frequent customer. He always occupied the same table with his laptop open and a cup of coffee he barely touched. One afternoon, while wiping down his table, Liam looked up and gave her a smile. "So, you work here now?" "Yes, it's a good place, quiet." "It is. Though it seems it's not your place. There's something about you that says you should be somewhere else, doing something bigger." Emily stood motionless for a moment, surprised by his words. "I'm just trying to start over. And what do you want to do after?" "I'm not sure yet. I'm still looking for answers." Liam nodded as if he understood more than she was saying. "Sometimes answers don't arrive, but you can create them." Emily didn't respond, but those words remained resonating in her mind. In the following days, Liam began to appear more often. Their conversations, though brief, were increasingly deep. Emily discovered that he owned a consulting firm, someone used to dealing with challenges and finding solutions. "You're smarter than you let on," he told her once while reviewing some papers at his usual table. "You shouldn't settle for being here. There is something in you, Emily. Don't waste it." At first, Emily doubted. What could she do? Everything she knew, everything she had been, was destroyed. But as days passed, she began to see something different in herself. Every word from Liam planted a seed that little by little began to grow. One afternoon, after finishing her shift, Emily sat with Liam at one of the cafe tables. "I've been thinking about what you said about not settling. I'm glad to hear it." "And what are you going to do about it?" "I want to try. I want to know what I'm capable of." Liam smiled as if he had been waiting for those words. "Then let me help you. Start with what you have now, with what you know. Everything else can be learned along the way." Emily felt a mix of fear and excitement. For the first time, she saw a path in front of her, although it was still full of uncertainties, but she knew she had to take it. Emily's small room was plunged in a silence barely interrupted by the noise of distant traffic. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she opened her suitcase, taking out the few possessions she had brought with her. Every object had a meaning, every garment a memory of the life she had left behind. Her hands touched something cold at the bottom. The emerald pendant. The shine of the pendant under the dim room light forced her to stop. Alexander had put it around her neck not so long ago, with empty words intended to be compliments. His intention had been clear. Now she understood. It wasn't a symbol of love, but an attempt to buy her silence and submission. She held it between her fingers, observing the contrast between the richness of the object and the austerity of the place where she now lived. She sighed, fighting against conflicting emotions. Finally, she placed it in the lowest drawer of the small nightstand next to the bed. She wasn't ready to face it, but she couldn't throw it away either. Not yet. Dawn brought with it a new purpose. Emily left her room carrying her apron under her arm and a notebook in her purse. The cafe where she worked was still closed when she arrived, but that didn't matter to her. She had things to do. Clean tables, arrange chairs, turn on lights, simple tasks that now seemed like small steps toward something bigger. When Liam arrived as usual, he greeted her with his habitual warm smile. "Did you rest?" "Not much, but I was thinking about what we talked about last night." "That means you're already taking the first step." Things that really matter always begin with an idea that doesn't let you sleep. She poured him a coffee and stood by his table. "I want to try, but I don't want you to give me solutions. Teach me how to find them myself." Liam closed his laptop, clearly intrigued by her determination. "That is what I like to hear most. Do you have time after your shift?" The day at the cafe was exhausting. Emily worked with a renewed purpose, hurrying to finish early and not lose the opportunity to learn something new. When the moment came, they sat together at a secluded table with a stack of papers between them. "Tell me what you know. It doesn't matter if you think it's little. Everything counts. I know how to listen." I know how to organize things. I learn fast, but I have no experience in anything that seems important. That's not true. Listening and organizing are skills many underestimate, and if you learn fast, you can achieve whatever you want. Now tell me, what do you want to learn? Emily looked at him intently, surprised by the question. It was the first time someone gave her the opportunity to decide. I want to learn to fend for myself. I want to understand how things work, how to make decisions that make me strong, not dependent. Liam nodded, starting to explain basic business concepts with examples. Although she initially doubted her capacity, she soon discovered her mind absorbed everything like a sponge. Days turned into weeks. Emily divided her time between work at the cafe and nightly lessons with Liam. The days were exhausting, but she didn't complain. Every task completed, every small success reminded her she was building something bigger. There were nights when the weariness was overwhelming. On one of those, while solving a complicated exercise, Liam stopped. Emily, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about learning numbers or strategies. It's about trusting yourself. What you are doing is harder than you think because you aren't just learning, you are challenging everything you believed about yourself. It's easier said than done. I know. I was there too. For the first time, Liam shared his story. He spoke of a failed business that had left him with nothing, of the mistakes that had forced him to start over. Emily listened with attention, feeling a connection she had never felt with anyone else. And how did you overcome it? I learned to look beyond failure. I surrounded myself with people who believed in me even when I didn't, like I am doing with you now. Each day, Emily felt stronger. Although there were doubts and moments of insecurity, the victories, however small, propelled her to keep going. One afternoon, while serving coffee to a customer, the owner of the place called her aside. I want you to handle the accounts this week. I've noticed how much you've learned, and I think you can do it. The initial fear gave way to determination. She spent nights reviewing numbers, calculating costs, and verifying errors. When she handed in the report, the owner was impressed. Good job, Emily. This is something you could do more often. That night, returning to her room, she opened the drawer where she had kept the pendant. She took it out, observing it under the dim light. She didn't see it as a symbol of her past, but as a reminder of how far she had come. She put it back, this time with a smile on her lips. In front of the mirror, she looked at herself as if seeing a new version of herself. She wasn't the broken woman who had arrived in Savannah. She was someone who knew her worth, someone who was building her future with her own hands. She took her notebook and wrote, I will never look back with fear again, only with pride. She put the notebook away and turned off the light, feeling that for the first time, she was on the right path. When Emily arrived at the property for the first time as the owner, the sound of the keys turning in the lock resonated in the empty building. She crossed the threshold slowly, feeling the creak of the wood under her feet. The air was stale with a smell of dust and abandonment that seemed to have permeated every wall, every forgotten piece of furniture. But she didn't see ruins. For Emily, this place was a blank canvas, a space waiting patiently to be transformed. She left her briefcase on the reception counter, a piece of dark wood with marks of years of use. She caressed it with her fingers, noting the cracks and grooves, imagining how it would be when it was renovated. She took a deep breath, as if she needed to gather every piece of strength she had built since leaving the Sterling mansion. Now it starts for real, she murmured to herself. The echo of her voice in the empty space made her smile. No one was there to applaud her achievement, but it didn't matter. For the first time, she didn't need anyone's approval. The first day at the inn was a mixture of exhaustion and discovery. Emily began by exploring every corner. The rooms were full of old furniture covered with yellowed sheets. The bathrooms, though functional, needed deep cleaning and repairs. The main dining room, with a high ceiling and enormous windows, looked like a sleeping giant waiting to wake up. She spent hours dusting, scrubbing floors, and checking what could be saved. She found antique lamps that with some effort could shine again, and mirrors with carved wood frames that only needed a little restoration. Every rescued object was a small victory, a reminder that even the forgotten could recover its splendor. When night fell, Emily was so tired she could barely stand. She sat in a chair at reception with her head resting in her hands. Her body ached, but in her chest she felt something more powerful: pride. That day, though hard, was the beginning of something worthwhile. The next morning arrived with a surprise. While Emily was checking the dining room, a man entered with a firm step, carrying a toolbox. His appearance was rustic, with clothes stained with paint and a cap covering his messy hair. "They told me this place has a new owner. Is that you?" Emily put down the rag she was cleaning with and looked at him with curiosity. "Yes, it's me. Who are you?" "I'm Mike, repairs. They told me there's work here for someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." She smiled, relieved to find help. "That depends on how much you charge. I'm just starting, and I don't have much budget." Mike let out a laugh. "As long as there's hot food and fair pay, we can start." That same afternoon, they began working together. Mike took charge of repairing the plumbing and electrical installations, while Emily continued cleaning and reorganizing the spaces. Although the work was exhausting, his presence made the heavy tasks more bearable. The renovation process took weeks. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories. When they were finally able to open the doors, the first customer was a young couple looking for a quiet place to spend the night. Emily received them with a smile that hid her nervousness. "Welcome to the Beacon Light Inn. I hope you enjoy your stay." Although the couple seemed happy, Emily spent the night awake, checking that everything was in order. The next day, when she saw they had left a note thanking her for the hospitality, she knew she was on the right path. One afternoon, while reviewing reservations, an unexpected invitation arrived by mail. It was for a local tourism fair, an event bringing together entrepreneurs in the sector. Emily knew it would be a valuable opportunity, but also a challenge. The day of the fair arrived quickly. Emily, in a simple but elegant dress, entered the event hall holding a folder with photos of the inn and statistics on her progress. Around her, the other participants seemed much more experienced, with polished presentations and rehearsed speeches. Emily waited for her turn with nerves, but when the moment came, she spoke with passion. She told the story of the inn, how it had been rescued from abandonment and transformed into a cozy space celebrating local culture. At the end of her presentation, a man approached with curiosity. "You have something interesting here. Mixing the traditional with the modern is a trend that works. Have you considered expanding your project?" Emily looked at him cautiously, remembering the betrayals of the past. "I'm not looking to sell my vision. I'm looking for allies who believe in it." The man smiled, impressed by her determination. "Then maybe we can work together." With the support of her new partner, Emily was able to implement improvements in the inn. The rooms received a modern touch but kept traditional details like handmade quilts and local wood furniture. She also inaugurated a small restaurant offering typical Southern dishes. Soon, online reviews began to highlight the authenticity and warmth of the place. One day, while checking her email, Emily received a message from a lifestyle magazine that wanted to include the Beacon Light Inn in its list of tourist recommendations. When she saw the name of the hotel printed in the article, she felt a mixture of pride and surprise. She had achieved it. She hadn't just saved a place in ruins, she had created something people valued. That night, walking through the hallways of the inn, Emily stopped in front of an antique mirror. Her reflection returned, a look full of determination. She remembered Alexander's words, "Mrs. Sterling's humiliations," and knew she wasn't finished yet. She approached the window and looked toward the lights of the city in the distance. "I'm not ready to go back yet. But when I do, it will be to show them who I am now." With that silent promise, she returned to her office. There was much to do, but now she knew she was capable of facing any challenge. Her name, though still unknown to many, was beginning to resonate in small circles, and with every step she took, she got closer to her goal, to return, not as the humiliated woman, but as someone no one could ignore. The Amtrak train pulled into Penn Station with a firm metallic sound, marking the end of a journey Emily had planned meticulously. From her seat, she observed the familiar lights of the city she had left years ago. It wasn't nostalgia she felt upon returning, but a cold and clear purpose, to reclaim what they had once tried to snatch from her. With a folder in her hands, she reviewed documents with the precision of a surgeon. They were balance sheets, financial reports, and meeting minutes of Sterling Enterprises. She knew that Alexander, despite his facade of success, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and that was exactly what she needed. Upon arriving at the lobby of an elegant midtown hotel, her personal assistant received her with a professional smile and a tablet full of updates. The contact confirmed the meeting for tomorrow. They are anxious to close the deal. Perfect. Make sure the terms are exactly as I drafted them. I don't want any margin for error. While going up in the elevator, Emily looked at her reflection in the steel walls. The woman she saw now looked nothing like the one who had left this city broken and humiliated. She wore an impeccable suit, her hair gathered in a low bun, and heels that sounded with authority in every step. In the room, she allowed herself a moment of pause. She looked out the window toward the skyline, remembering the days in the Sterling mansion, Mrs. Sterling's contemptuous looks, and Alexander's cruel words. That past no longer had power over her, but it was the engine driving every one of her decisions. The meeting the next day took place in a corporate building downtown. Emily arrived on time, with an air of security that captured the attention of everyone in the room. The partners of Sterling Enterprises, older men in suits reflecting a past era of glory, stood up to greet her without knowing exactly who she was. One of them leaned toward her while they reviewed the documents. "It is interesting that someone of your level is interested in a company that is, how to put it, going through difficult times." Emily responded with a calculated smile. "I am interested in potential, not problems, and I believe that with the right strategy, this can be a very lucrative project." The deal closed without setbacks. Emily acquired a significant portion of the Sterling Enterprises shares, but she ensured her identity remained hidden behind a network of LLCs. She didn't want Alexander to know who was behind it until it was too late. Days later, while supervising one of her new acquisitions, she attended a social event at one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. It was a charity gala, the kind of place where high society gathered to show off their wealth disguised as altruism. Upon entering the ballroom, gazes turned toward her not because they recognized her, but because of the confidence with which she moved. Her high-fashion black dress and elegant bearing made her stand out in the crowd. A waiter passed with a tray of drinks, and Emily took one while observing the room. That was when she saw him. Alexander was on the other side of the room, chatting with a group of men who seemed just as arrogant as him. Time hadn't been kind to him. Although he still maintained his groomed appearance, there was something in his posture and expression that betrayed the wearer. His company was on the verge of collapse, and that was reflected in every one of his words and gestures. As he spoke, his eyes crossed with Emily's. For a moment, he seemed bewildered. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place her. Emily held his gaze for a few seconds, then smiled subtly and diverted her attention. Alexander, intrigued, excused himself from the group and walked toward her. "Excuse me, but I feel like I know you from somewhere. Have we met before?" Emily looked at him with a neutral expression, as if she were looking at any stranger. "I don't think so, but it's a pleasure to meet you. Alexander, right?" He smiled, relieved that his name still carried weight. "Yes, Alexander Sterling. And you are?" "Just an investor interested in new projects. Nothing more." The conversation was brief but left Alexander with an uncomfortable feeling. Something about her threw him off, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Emily, for her part, enjoyed the small triumph of seeing him so insecure. Days later, Emily called a shareholders' meeting for Sterling Enterprises. It was held in an elegant boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. Alexander arrived late, as always, with his carefree attitude trying to hide his growing stress. When Emily entered the room, the murmurs ceased. Although most of those present didn't know who she was, her presence was impossible to ignore. She took a seat at the head of the table, letting the silence do its work before beginning to speak. "I have carefully reviewed the situation of this company, and I am here to announce that as of today, I have majority control." The statement fell like a bomb. Alexander, who had been checking his phone, looked up abruptly. "What are you saying? That's impossible." Emily looked directly at him, her voice as sharp as a knife. "What you heard. I bought enough shares to make decisions about the future of this company. And believe me, Alexander, the future will be very different from the past." He stood up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "Who the hell are you to come here and—" Emily interrupted him without losing her calm. "Don't you recognize me, Alexander? Maybe you should look closer. I am the woman you once thought you could humiliate and discard. But today, I am much more than that. I am your worst mistake." The room fell silent as Emily's words echoed. Alexander couldn't believe what he was hearing. He staggered back as if each of those sentences were a direct hit. Emily gathered her documents with imperturbable elegance. Before leaving the room, she stopped at the door and looked at Alexander one last time. This is just the beginning. As she left the building, the fresh air wrapped around her, filling her with a sense of triumph. It wasn't revenge she sought, but justice. And now she had the power to write the end of that story on her own terms. The ballroom looked like a sea of golden lights reflected in crystal chandeliers hanging like jewels from the ceiling. Every corner exuded luxury, tables covered with white linen tablecloths, perfectly aligned floral arrangements, and waiters moving with almost choreographed precision. The soft music of a piano filled the air, mixing with elegant conversations and moderate laughter from the guests. Emily paused upon entering, observing the atmosphere as a strategist evaluates the battlefield. Every detail told a story of ostentation and an elite reveling in its own importance. However, for her, this night wasn't just another event, but a calculated move. She wore a scarlet-red dress, simple in its cut but majestic in its impact. The color was a statement, as if she had decided to burn any trace of the past, linking her to submission. Her hair gathered in a low bun framed her face with serene elegance that attracted everyone's gaze. Her heels resonated with every step she took, as if the room recognized her presence before the guests did. She approached the bar, seeking to observe without being immediately recognized, not because she feared being seen, but because she wished to choose the perfect moment to reveal her return. While waiting for her glass of wine, she turned her head slowly and saw him. Alexander was in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of suited men laughing and toasting with artificial euphoria. At first glance, he seemed the same. Alexander, she remembered, impeccable, with his hair combed with precision and his suit perfectly fitted. But something in his posture betrayed the weight of circumstances. There was a rigidity in his shoulders and a restlessness in his eyes he hadn't had before. She couldn't help feeling a mixture of emotions upon seeing him. She remembered the nights of silence, the humiliations disguised as jokes, and that last night when he had destroyed her publicly, but this time there was no pain in her heart, only a cold determination fueling every fiber of her being. Her eyes crossed with his. Alexander stared at her, as if trying to decipher who this woman was who seemed familiar and strange at the same time. He left his glass on the table and began walking toward her, leaving his group behind without even saying goodbye. "Excuse me, but I feel like I know you from somewhere. It's strange because I'm sure I would remember someone like you." Emily turned slowly toward him, holding her glass of wine with almost defiant elegance. She looked him in the eye without wavering, letting the silence play its part before responding. "Maybe you remember me from a place you prefer to forget." Alexander frowned, intrigued. His smile seemed confident, but Emily could notice the confusion behind his facade. "I don't usually forget important people, and you definitely seem like someone who isn't easily forgotten." What is easily forgotten isn't always what doesn't matter. Sometimes it's what we prefer not to face. Alexander laughed softly, though his laugh was more from nerves than amusement. Something in her tone, in her look, unsettled him deeply, though he couldn't pinpoint what. "You're enigmatic, I admit, but I'd like to know you better. What do you say if I buy you a drink?" "I already have my drink, and I also have better things to do than accept invitations from men who have gotten used to ignoring what really matters." Alexander's smile vanished for a moment, replaced by an expression of bewilderment. It was rare for anyone to speak to him like that, and even rarer for them to do so with a confidence that made him feel small. "Are you sure we don't know each other? Because there is something about you I can't forget. That is your problem, not mine." Before he could respond, a female voice interrupted. Jessica arrived at Alexander's side as if she had sensed the danger of losing her position. She wore a tight, emerald-colored dress designed to capture attention, but her entrance was more abrupt than elegant. "Am I interrupting something?" "Alexander, darling, I thought you were going to stay with me tonight. I didn't know you had already made new friends." Emily kept her gaze fixed on Alexander, deliberately ignoring Jessica for a few seconds. Then she turned her head slowly toward her, studying her as someone studies an insect that has just landed in their path. "We aren't friends. And I don't think we have anything in common either." Jessica tilted her head, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How interesting. I can't help but ask, How does someone so intriguing end up here, in such an exclusive event? You don't seem like the type who frequents these circles. Maybe I don't look like it. But that doesn't mean I don't belong. Sometimes the place you occupy doesn't depend on how you are seen, but on what you are capable of achieving. Jessica pursed her lips, clearly annoyed by the answer. Alexander, who up to that moment had been silent, tried to calm the tension. Jessica, we were just having an interesting conversation. There is no need to. Of course there is no need, Alexander. You should know that an interesting woman never stays in the same place for long. Emily smiled, a small smile but loaded with intention. Exactly. That is why I think this is the perfect moment to say goodbye. It was a pleasure observing. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking toward the exit, leaving Alexander and Jessica motionless in the middle of the room. She could feel their gazes stuck to her back, but she didn't care. Her mission tonight wasn't to confront them directly, but to plant a seed of uncertainty in their minds. And she had succeeded. When she crossed the doors of the ballroom, the fresh night air welcomed her like relief. She inhaled deeply, letting the wind clear her mind. Tonight had been just a piece in a much larger game, and now it was clear that the match was in her favor. She stopped for a moment, looking toward the city lights stretching before her. It won't be the last time you see me, but next time you won't have doubts about who I am. With that silent promise, she walked away, knowing the true confrontation was getting closer. The boardroom was impregnated with an expectant silence. The wide windows offered a majestic view of the city, but inside the room, the air seemed compressed, as if the tension among those present were capable of displacing the oxygen. Emily walked toward the entrance with firm steps. Her white dress, cut impeccably, shone under the ceiling light, but what really caught the attention was the emerald pendant adorning her neck, shining like a declaration of power and sarcasm. She pushed the door calmly, letting the echo of her heels resonate on the marble while those present turned their heads. The shareholders, men and women seasoned in the business world, looked at each other, bewildered by the eruption of a stranger with such a magnetic presence. The chairman of the board, with a distinguished bearing and silver hair carefully combed, cleared his throat to cut the murmur. "Miss, this meeting is private. I don't know how you managed to get in here, but I ask you to leave." Emily sketched a calm smile, loaded with a challenge that left everyone immobile. "I don't need permission to be here. My place is more than secured." She placed a leather folder on the table and pushed it toward the center. The shareholders began to lean in to review the documents, exchanging incredulous looks. The murmur intensified just as Alexander entered the room hurriedly, adjusting his jacket with tense movements. "What is going on here? Who is this woman?" Emily turned slowly toward him. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the security Alexander had always projected seemed to wobble. He fixed his gaze on the pendant, recognizing it immediately. "It can't be." "Emily?" Emily's smile widened barely, but the fire in her eyes said everything words could not express. "The same one, Alexander. The one you despised, the one you humiliated and betrayed. But I am no longer that woman. Now I am here to settle accounts." Alexander's face oscillated between disbelief and fury. "This is ridiculous. What do you think you're doing? You have no idea who you're playing with." "Playing? Perhaps you should review the documents I just left on the table. Though to be honest, I doubt you want to face what they contain." The shareholders, moved by a mixture of curiosity and alarm, began to examine the papers more closely. Alexander crossed the room in 3 long strides, snatching one of the documents from an older man's hands. "What does this mean?" "It means I am the new majority owner of this company. While you were busy despising the world from your pedestal, I was buying every available share, piece by piece. Now, control is mine." The words fell like a hammer on the room. Alexander stepped back, as if the blow had been physical. "This is nothing more than childish revenge. You have no idea what it means to manage a company like this. This isn't for just anyone." Emily took a step toward him with a calm that disarmed even the most experienced in that room. "You're right, Alexander. This isn't for just anyone. That is why now it is in the hands of someone who does know its value. Someone who learned to build with effort and not destroy with arrogance." The door burst open, and Mrs. Sterling stormed into the room in her blue silk dress and an expression of contained fury. "What is the meaning of all this? Alexander, Why is this woman here? I demand an explanation." Emily turned toward her, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I am not this woman. I am Emily Sterling Lopez, and I am the owner of this company. You no longer have authority to decide who enters or leaves this place." Mrs. Sterling let out a bitter laugh, as if her words were a ridiculous joke. "This cannot be true. Alexander, tell her something. Don't allow this imposter to get away with it." Alexander remained silent, unable to formulate a response. Emily adjusted the emerald pendant on her neck, drawing the attention of everyone present. "This." Emily touched the cold stones with one hand. "You gave it to me as a symbol of your power, of your control over me. But now you know what it means?" "Absolutely nothing." Mrs. Sterling took a step forward, but Emily stopped her with a look that would have frozen anyone. "For years I endured your scorn, your humiliations, but now the rules of the game have changed. And believe me, I am not going to be generous." Without waiting for a response, Emily took off the pendant with an elegant movement and dropped it into her purse with a nonchalant gesture. Her action was a clear symbol that she no longer owed anything to any of them. Gathering her documents, she cast a final look at Alexander and Mrs. Sterling. "I hope you enjoy what you have left, because now your destinies are no longer in your hands." The echo of her heels resonated on the marble as she left the room, leaving an overwhelming silence behind her. Outside, the fresh wind caressed her face, and for the first time in a long time, she breathed with a freedom she knew she had earned by force. She looked toward the city, its lights shining like a promise of what was to come. Her mind was no longer trapped in the past, but focused on everything she could still build. Nothing and no one could stop her. The auditorium was filled with an expectation that could almost be touched. The attendees, prominent figures of the business and social world, settled in their seats, exchanging whispers about the event. The warm lighting highlighted expressions of curiosity and anticipation. On stage, the podium remained empty, waiting for the moment the protagonist of the night would fill it with her presence. Backstage, Emily looked at herself in the dressing room mirror. Her white jacket, impeccably cut, reflected her evolution. It wasn't just a symbol of power, but of serenity. She adjusted her brooch with care, and for an instant let her gaze travel to the emerald pendant lying in her purse. She had brought it not as an ornament, but as a silent witness to everything she had overcome. Her fingers brushed the clasp of the purse, and a fleeting thought crossed her mind. That object, once a symbol of oppression, now meant nothing. The master of ceremonies went up to the stage. His voice resonated with authority, silencing the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present our next speaker, a woman whose story defies limits and redefines strength. Please, let's welcome with a round of applause, Emily Lopez." Applause flooded the room as Emily emerged from the shadows backstage. She walked with a firm step, her heels resonating on the wooden floor like a declaration of power. Her posture was erect, her gaze direct. Every movement seemed choreographed by the security she radiated. From the front rows, Alexander watched her with a mixture of disbelief and bewilderment. He couldn't comprehend how that woman, whom he had discarded as something dispensable, had become the figure now dominating everyone's attention. Beside him, Mrs. Sterling maintained an expression of false indifference, but the rigidity of her crossed hands betrayed her discomfort. Emily arrived at the podium, adjusted the microphone calmly, and let the silence prolong itself. She looked at the audience, allowing each attendee to feel she was speaking directly to them. Finally, she began. "Good evening. Today we not only celebrate achievements, but we reflect on what leads us to reach them. Every success story has chapters of struggle. And this is mine." Her voice was clear and paused, but charged with intention. Her gaze, though general, stopped for a moment on Alexander and Mrs. Sterling before continuing. "Some years ago, I wouldn't have imagined being here in front of you. The woman I was then was invisible to many, irrelevant to others. A woman whom they tried to silence, minimize, reduce to a shadow of herself. But that woman found a teacher in rejection, and a spark in pain that turned into fire." The whispers ceased. No one in the auditorium wanted to miss a single word. "They taught me what it means to be ignored, humiliated, and discarded. But they also taught me that those wounds didn't define me. What I did with them did. I learned that scars are not marks of weakness, but medals of battles won." Alexander swallowed hard from his seat. The tension was evident. He had expected to see her waver, show herself vulnerable, but what he saw was the complete opposite. Her posture, her tone, her message, everything indicated she was in complete control. Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. Today I am here as a testimony that no matter how much they try to extinguish you, if you decide to stand firm, even the shadows can be a place to flourish. Because strength doesn't come from not falling, but from getting up every time you do. The applause that followed was deafening. Alexander, unable to stand it anymore, got up from his seat and walked toward the side of the stage. When he saw her pause briefly, he found his opportunity. "Emily, please, listen to me." The murmur returned to the auditorium. Emily turned her head toward him, her expression serene but with an edge Alexander recognized immediately. "Let me explain. I know I made mistakes, but we can resolve this. Give me a chance to prove I can change." She looked at him for a few seconds that seemed eternal. The Alexander she saw now wasn't the same one she had known. He was weaker, almost unrecognizable. But that vision didn't awaken compassion, only an unshakable certainty. "You had years to talk, Alexander. Years to show respect and humanity. But you didn't. I have nothing more to say to you. Please. I know I can change. I just need time to prove it. Opportunities are not asked for, they are earned. And you lost them all." From her seat, Mrs. Sterling stood up with the haughty dignity she had always worn like a shield. Her voice cut the air like a blade. "You have no right to humiliate my son this way. This is an absurd spectacle. You were always insignificant. I don't know how you got here, but you are nothing more than a shadow in this room." Emily didn't look away from her. Her response came with the calm of one who had already won the battle. "Insignificant? That is what you thought for years. But I want you to remember something. The things we underestimate have a peculiar way of becoming what we fear most." Mrs. Sterling stepped back, unable to hold Emily's gaze. Alexander lowered his head, defeated. The room remained silent, charged with a tension no one dared to break. Emily turned back to the audience, resuming her speech with the same security with which she had started. "True strength does not lie in what we possess, but in what we overcome. Power is not measured by the control we have over others, but by the transformation we are capable of achieving in ourselves." The auditorium rose in applause, giving Emily a standing ovation. She breathed deeply, letting the moment prolong a few seconds more before stepping down from the stage. Before leaving the building, she took the emerald pendant from her purse, holding it under the light. She observed it carefully before putting it away again. "It is not the object that has value, but what we decide to do with what we learn, and this no longer means anything to me." Outside, the night was cool, and the city lights shone like a promise of everything that was to come. She breathed deeply, feeling the freedom of having closed a chapter of her life. Now the future was hers to write, and she knew every word would be a testimony to her strength, her resilience, and her capacity to transform pain into greatness. The light of dawn entered weakly through the broken window of the small room where Alexander lived. The air smelled of dampness, and the stained walls were a constant reminder of everything he had lost. He got out of bed with slow movements, feeling in every joint the weight of an exhaustion more emotional than physical. He looked for his worn shoes with nearly smooth soles while trying to ignore the echo of his own thoughts, those that wouldn't leave him in peace. The day had begun, and with it a routine he would have never imagined for himself. As he went down the stairs of the building, he remembered almost with nostalgia the mornings when his biggest worry was choosing between designer suits or which car to use. Now, a long shift awaited him at the warehouse, where he would lift boxes and face the subtle contempt of coworkers who knew who he had been and enjoyed his fall. In the warehouse, the atmosphere was cold, with a smell of cardboard and sweat permeating every corner. While adjusting a stack of boxes, one of the young workers approached, balancing a clipboard in his hand. His smile had a hint of mockery. "They say you used to be someone important. Is that true? Because it doesn't look like it." Alexander looked at him for an instant, feeling his wounded pride wanting to respond harshly, but the words that came out were different. "I was. But importance is a fragile thing. One bad decision or many is enough for it to disappear." The young man, surprised by his answer, let out a nervous laugh before walking away. Alexander sighed, feeling the weight of his own words. He had spent months trying to justify his fall, blaming others or fate. But in that moment, he understood that everything had been a consequence of his arrogance, of his inability to value those around him. Later, during his break, he dared to send a text to one of his old colleagues, someone with whom he shared moments of glory. The answer didn't take long to arrive, but it wasn't what he expected. "Sorry, Alex, but I can't be associated with you. Your name doesn't inspire confidence anymore. Good luck." The rejection burned like an open wound. He had lost not only his possessions but also the respect he had once demanded with such ease. He finished the day in silence, carrying more boxes, accepting that he would have to start from the ground up, like someone who had never had anything. In another part of the city, Jessica walked with quick steps, trying to ignore the curious glances following her movements. Her dress, though elegant in another time, now seemed out of place, wrinkled and with stains she hadn't even noticed when leaving home. Money was running out, and the few connections she still had were crumbling with every unanswered call. Decided not to accept her new reality, she sought out an exclusive party, a place where important names still gathered. She thought she could manipulate someone, as she had done so many times. When she managed to get in, she smiled with the security of someone who believes they have control. But minutes were enough to realize it was an illusion. No one looked at her, no one approached. On the contrary, the people she tried to talk to sought any excuse to move away. An elegant and haughty woman stopped in front of her. "Jessica, what a surprise to see you here. I didn't know you still frequented these places." Jessica tried to smile, but the security in her voice wobbled. "Of course, I've always been part of this circle." "Really?" "Well, the truth is we thought you had disappeared along with, you know." The comment, accompanied by a cynical smile, was enough for Jessica to feel the walls closing in around her. She left the party hurriedly, her cheeks burning and hands trembling. In the solitude of her apartment, she looked in the mirror. She was no longer the woman who dominated conversations and captured gazes. Now she only saw someone clinging desperately to a past that no longer existed. She decided to find Alexander. Maybe together they could rebuild something. She found him leaving the warehouse, his shirt wrinkled and hair messy. For an instant, she thought about retreating, but her need to feel safe was stronger. "Is this your job now?" Alexander stopped upon hearing her voice. He looked at her with surprise, but also with a trace of sadness. "What do you want, Jessica?" "I want to understand what happened to us. Before, we had everything. We were invincible. How did we end up like this?" "What happened is that we didn't value anything. We believed the world belonged to us, and when the world stopped looking at us, we had nothing else to offer." She looked at him, trying to find in his face some sign that there was still something of the man she had known. "We can recover what we had. Together, you and I were always a team." "No, Jessica. You and I were never a team. We were allies in our own arrogance, and that destroyed us." "So what are you going to do? Keep carrying boxes forever?" "If necessary, yes. Because at least now I understand what work means, what each thing is worth. You should try the same." Jessica looked at him incredulously as he walked away without looking back. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her loneliness. Her ability to manipulate no longer served. She had lost not only her status, but also the ability to connect with anyone genuinely. That night, Alexander arrived at his room with a decision made. The next day, he asked to stay after his shift to help organize the warehouse tools. He wanted to demonstrate that even being in the lowest place, he could contribute something of value. While cleaning the space, he felt for the first time in months a sense of purpose, however small. Jessica, for her part, sat in front of her mirror. She removed her makeup with slow movements, almost ritualistic. As she did so, she forced herself to face the truth. She had spent her whole life building an image, but never an essence. Tears began to fall not for the loss of her status, but for realizing she didn't know who she was without it. Meanwhile, the city lights shone on the paths of those seeking redemption, those facing their falls not as punishment, but as necessary lessons. Alexander and Jessica understood, each in their own way, that arrogance and contempt always charged their price. The question was whether they would have the strength to rebuild themselves from those ruins. The afternoon was dressed in a faint golden glow covering the streets of Savannah like a whisper of hope. Emily walked calmly, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but her mind traveling between memories and possibilities. The squares adorned with vibrant flowers seemed more alive than usual, and every laugh resonating in the distance, mixed with the murmur of the wind, like a song speaking of new beginnings. That day, without knowing why, she had felt the need to slow down, to let herself be carried by the steps and paths opening before her. Turning a corner, her eyes stopped on a small bookstore, a place that seemed to have come out of another time. The dark wood shelves peeked from the window, overflowing with books telling stories of different worlds. Something in the scene attracted her with an inexplicable force, as if a part of her past were waiting there. She entered slowly, pushing the door gently. The sound of the bell wrapped her in immediate warmth, accompanied by the comforting aroma of old paper and worn wood. She walked among the shelves, letting her fingers run over the perfectly aligned spines. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the days when she sought refuge in places like this, where books were her only company. "I always knew you were a woman of words." The warm and familiar voice broke the silence of the place. Emily turned slowly, and her eyes met a smile that had marked a crucial point in her life. Liam was there, standing next to a shelf with a book in his hand, and that same look that seemed to unravel the secrets of souls. For an instant, words escaped her. Years had passed since the last time she had seen him, but the connection remained intact, as if time had woven a bond that neither distance nor adversities could break. "Liam, I didn't think Savannah still had a place for you. Let's say Savannah always calls me back when I least expect it, and you, although you don't say it, I know you don't stroll through here without a purpose." Emily let out a brief laugh, but in her eyes shone something deeper. "Maybe I'm looking for something, or maybe I'm trying to remember who I was before all this." Liam tilted his head slightly, studying her as if he wanted to decipher every change in her. "It doesn't matter how much you change, Emily. You always carry that strength in your eyes. Only now it is more evident." They walked together among the shelves, and at first, the conversation flowed like a calm river, touching on light topics, favorite books, places they had visited, moments that made them laugh. But as they advanced, words began to strip off their superficiality, revealing emotions that had remained hidden. "You know," said Liam, while holding an antique book in his hands, "I never told you, but your struggle, your way of getting up, taught me more than I could have imagined. Seeing you rebuild what others tried to destroy, you inspired me to face my own fears." Emily looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his words. "Fears? I always thought you were the one who had all the answers, who knew how to face anything. That's what you believed because that's what I showed. But inside, I had doubts, insecurities that paralyzed me. Seeing how you faced your challenges, how you took every blow and transformed it into something valuable, made me realize that I could do it too." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She wasn't used to someone recognizing her strength that way. "Thank you, Liam. But you weren't the only one who learned something. In the darkest moments, your words were my refuge. They reminded me there was something beyond the storm, something worth fighting for." He left the book on a nearby table and looked at her intently, with an intensity that made her stop. "You are more than you imagined you could be, Emily, and that is something the world needs to see." They left the bookstore together, and the night was beginning to wrap the streets in an embrace of warm lights. They found a small cafe with outdoor tables and sat under a tree, dropping leaves with every breath of wind. While waiting for their drinks, the conversation continued, now more intimate and charged with meaning. "Your success doesn't surprise me," Liam said while holding his coffee cup. "I always knew you had something special, but seeing you now, with that security, is inspiring." Emily smiled, but her eyes showed a mixture of humility and gratitude. "For the first time in a long time, I feel that every step makes sense. And although I know there is still much to do, it doesn't weigh on me like before." Liam took a sip before answering, his gaze fixed on hers. "That is because you found what many spend their lives looking for, purpose. And with that, it doesn't matter what comes. You will always be ready to face it." Emily lowered her gaze for a moment, processing his words. There was something in his tone, in the conviction with which he spoke, that made her feel invincible. "Liam, I can't help but wonder something. If I inspired you, what could we achieve together?" He raised his eyebrows, surprised but clearly intrigued. "That is a dangerous question, because I think the answer has no limits." Both laughed, but the seriousness behind their words remained suspended in the air like a promise of infinite possibilities. As the night advanced, they said goodbye in front of the cafe. Liam took her hand for an instant, a gesture charged with meaning. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm glad our paths crossed again. And I'm happy to see you, Liam. Because you remind me that we are never really alone, even in the darkest moments." Emily walked away feeling that something had changed in her. While walking under the city lights, her thoughts filled with new possibilities. Not only had she found strength in herself, but also in connection with others, in alliances that could transform the world. She raised her gaze toward the horizon, and in her chest grew a certainty. The future was not only hers, but a canvas where she could trace new stories. This time, accompanied. The rain beat softly against the office windows, filling the silence with a constant, almost melancholic rhythm. Emily, leaning against the edge of her desk, reviewed papers with the same precision she had learned to apply in every decision of her life. But her mind, for an instant, drifted toward the small box resting on a shelf. The emerald pendant was still there, intact, like a reminder of a life that no longer belonged to her. She had kept it years ago, unable to decide what to do with it. Today, for the first time, she wondered if it wasn't time to change that. The sound of hurried steps brought her back to reality. The housekeeper appeared at the door, visibly uncomfortable, hands clasped in front of her. "Ma'am, there is someone at the door. She says it's important." Emily didn't even look up. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Eleanor Sterling." The pen stopped in her hand for a second. The rain seemed to fade in her mind, and the tension in her jaw became evident, but she didn't let that discomfort reflect in her voice. "Sarah, let her in." The echo of Mrs. Sterling's heels resonated in the wide vestibule before she appeared in the doorway of the office. Emily waited for her standing, with an unbreakable posture. While the woman crossed the door, the haughty figure she remembered was there, but there were cracks in her facade. Her impeccable clothes looked somewhat worn, and her eyes betrayed a weariness that not even makeup managed to hide. "Emily." Her voice sounded contained, as if every word cost effort. "Thank you for seeing me." She tilted her head slightly, studying her. Mrs. Sterling seemed to hesitate, searching for the right words in a silence that stretched longer than necessary. Finally, she took a breath and spoke. "I come to ask for your help." The phrase left a palpable tension in the atmosphere. Emily, without saying anything, walked toward the window. She watched how the rain drew blurred lines on the glass, and then looked back at her. "My help? How curious. You always thought I was worth nothing. What could I offer you now?" Mrs. Sterling pressed her lips together, swallowing the words her pride demanded she release. Finally, her gaze softened. "I know, Emily. I know what we did, what I allowed them to do to you. And there is no excuse for it. But now, I have no choice but to turn to you. Speak clearly." Emily's voice was as firm as the ground beneath her feet. Mrs. Sterling lowered her gaze for an instant before facing her. "We are on the verge of collapse. Alexander lost everything left of the company. The banks don't trust us, and our allies have turned their backs on us. I am here because you are the only person who can help us." Emily crossed her arms, letting out a brief laugh without humor. "Do you really expect me to help you? After everything you did to me? After how you made sure I never felt enough? That I never believed I belonged to your family?" "I know." Mrs. Sterling's voice trembled for the first time, but she didn't back down. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I don't do it for me, Emily. I do it for Alexander. He is destroyed, lost. I don't know how much more he can take." Emily took a step toward her, eyes locked on Mrs. Sterling's as if trying to unravel every corner of her soul. "And what do you expect me to do? Save him as if nothing happened? Forget everything I endured because of you? I hope." Mrs. Sterling breathed deeply, seeking strength. "I hope you have a heart bigger than mine, because I know I was cruel to you, that I let myself be blinded by my pride and my fear. But Alexander is my son, and although I know we don't deserve it, I ask you not to let him fall further." The silence that followed was like a taut rope about to break. Emily turned on her heels, returning to the desk. There, next to the pile of papers, was the small box with the pendant. She opened it, letting the shine of the emeralds catch her gaze for an instant. "Do you know what this represents to me?" She lifted it between her fingers, showing it to Mrs. Sterling. "A gift Alexander gave me. Not as a show of love, but as a reminder that for him, I was just an ornament, an excuse to calm his guilt while he did whatever he wanted. She dropped the pendant back into the box and closed the lid with a dry click. Her voice softened, but her firmness remained. I am going to help you, Mrs. Sterling. Not for you, nor for Alexander. I do it because I understand what it means to lose everything. But this is not forgiveness, and much less forgetting. Mrs. Sterling's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and humiliation. Thank you, Emily. I know I can't ask for more than that. Emily took a folder from her desk and extended it toward her. These are the terms. I will restructure the company, but everything will be under my supervision. Alexander will not have access to important decisions until he proves to me that he has changed. Mrs. Sterling nodded, accepting the documents with trembling hands. We will do it your way, I promise. When Mrs. Sterling left, Emily remained standing by the desk. She observed the box one more time, allowing herself a moment of reflection. Why did she still have it? Maybe the time had come to transform that symbol of pain into something with true purpose. She turned toward the window, watching the rain beginning to stop. Inside her, a decision was brewing. It was time to close that chapter once and for all. Not with resentment, but with an action that reaffirmed who she was now. A free woman with the power to decide her own destiny. Sunset bathed Savannah with a light that seemed like magic. Every corner of the city shone with a soft gold, and the streets, viewed from the large windows of the New Light Foundation, looked like a moving painting. Emily stood alone in the main hall, contemplating the horizon with a mixture of calm and emotion. The building, with its modern architecture and traditional details, was a masterpiece reflecting what she had achieved, not just for herself, but for others who, like her, sought to be reborn. On a delicately illuminated glass table rested the emerald necklace. She held it in her hands, running her fingers over each of the stones. It wasn't just a jewel, it was a symbol, a reminder of how the past had tried to trap her, but also of how she had found the strength to break free. A flash in her mind took her back to the day Alexander gave it to her. They were in the living room of that mansion now, seeming so distant. Alexander had arrived late, as always, but with a charming smile and a small velvet case in hand. This is for you, to remind you how important you are to me. She had opened it with emotion, finding the jewel she now held. Back then, the emerald seemed to shine with a love she believed real. She had felt the gift was an affirmation of everything she dreamed of in her marriage: love, respect, stability. But now she knew the truth. It hadn't been a gesture of love, but an attempt to silence her doubts and keep her under control. Back in the present, Emily let out a sigh. She had kept the necklace for years, first as a painful memory, and then as a reminder of what she would never again allow in her life. Now was the moment to transform it, to give it a new purpose. The director of the foundation, a man with silver hair and warm eyes, approached with a smile. Emily, this gesture is much more than a donation. This necklace will fund scholarships, mentorship programs, and workshops for young women who, like you, deserve a chance to start over. She nodded, letting the necklace finally rest in the display case prepared for it. The click of the lock resonated in the space like an echo of closure in her own life. I always believed things were worth their price, but I learned that what is truly valuable is what we can do with them. This necklace symbolized a stage that no longer defines me. Now I want it to be a symbol of something much bigger. The director observed her face with admiration. How did you manage to find that strength, Emily? Most in your place would have fallen into resentment. She took a moment before answering, remembering all the stages of her journey. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or justifying. It means freeing yourself. For a long time, I carried the weight of pain, betrayal, resentment, but one day I understood I couldn't build anything if I didn't let go of all that. Forgiving was my way of regaining control of my life. The director smiled, nodding before retreating to attend to other guests. Emily was left alone in front of the window, looking at the city that now seemed to reflect her own steps. Her thoughts took her back to the first nights in Savannah. She remembered her small room, the endless shifts at the cafe, the moments when she doubted herself. She remembered Liam's words when he told her that her strength didn't depend on anyone else, but on her ability to learn and move forward. While reflecting, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Liam with an expression of pride and complicity illuminating the room. "I knew I would find you here." She smiled, allowing herself an instant of relaxation. To think something so small can mean so much to someone. "This necklace, in other hands, will fulfill a much more valuable purpose than in mine." Liam approached her side, observing her more than the jewel. "It's not the necklace that matters, Emily. It's what you've done with it, what it represents. The ability to transform even the deepest wounds into something beautiful. That is what makes you special." She diverted her gaze toward the horizon, letting his words resonate in her heart. "There is still so much to do, so much to build. But this time, I know I won't do it alone." Liam smiled, standing in front of her with a look full of trust. "Wherever you go, you will always find people willing to walk with you, and I hope to be one of them." Emily took his hand, a small gesture but charged with meaning. Together they walked toward the main hall, where guests chatted and celebrated the inauguration of the foundation. When she raised her glass to toast, her voice resonated in the room, strong and clear. "To those who have fallen and gotten up, to those who understood that true power is not in what we possess, but in what we are capable of building from our own ashes. And above all, to those who choose to forgive, not to forget, but to be free." Applause filled the space, and Emily felt a peace she had never experienced before. She looked toward the horizon through the windows, seeing not just the lights of Savannah, but a future full of possibilities. As the camera zoomed in on her face, her eyes shone with determination. Every tear, every sacrifice had brought her here. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that we can always rise stronger, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Together, let's keep inspiring lives to transform. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey.